Hello and welcome to the Living Legacy series from Of the I Sing American Heritage Through Song. I am Audrey Johnson, classically trained opera singer and founder of the I Sing, and I am so grateful to have you all here today for another episode of this series. The mission of the I Sing is to bring American heritage to life through music, and a cornerstone of this mission is to support and champion contemporary American composers because they are the living legacy of our nation's musical heritage and culture. I especially love featuring their musical settings of American poetry because this brings our national treasury of literature to the forefront as well. I believe deeply in our nation's music and poetry, and I am honored to be an ambassador of this music with the vision of bringing people together through the power of song. This series will give us all the chance to get to know these wonderful and important American artists, and I feature a different composer and one of his or her songs in each month's episode. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you all to my dear friend and talented composer, Cole Thomason-Redus. A San Francisco born and based educator, performer, and conductor, Cole has spent over a quarter century serving the music industry in many diverse ways, highlighting his vast array of skill sets. Currently, Cole is the Educational Content Curator in the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Community at the San Francisco Opera, where he is a host of the online weekly series Opera Aficionado. Still a teacher at heart, Cole is also the Upper Division Director of the Marin Girls Chorus and an Associate Conductor of the National Children's Chorus. Prior to this, Cole was the Director of Education for the Grammy Award-winning vocal ensemble Chanticleer, after having served a 7-year tenure as Curator of Classical Music at Apple Incorporated and 3 years as a Classical Music Analyst for the Music Genome Project at Pandora Media Incorporated. Schools and organizations for which he has taught include the San Francisco Boys Chorus, Ragazzi Boys Chorus, Ruth Asawa San Francisco School of the Arts, and San Francisco Arts Education Project. He was a co-founding director of the International Orange Chorale and has sung in performances and recordings with numerous ensembles throughout the Bay Area, earning him 2 Grammy Awards as a choral artist. As an entertainer, Cole's repertoire spans widely from vocal art songs, his own compositions for piano, and a host of one-man shows drawing predominantly from the American Songbook. A graduate in music and composition from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, his works have been performed by such prestigious ensembles as Cantus and the San Francisco Symphony Chorus, and have garnered such praise as the most beautiful piece of dissonance I can remember hearing from the San Francisco Classical Voice. A product of San Francisco public schools and a ridiculously hardworking mother, Cole is a passionate advocate and supporter of numerous cultural and educational organizations. Serving on the board of directors of Volti San Francisco, the advisory board of San Francisco Arts Education Project, and the program committee of Music in Schools Today. He believes strongly that affordable arts education of the highest quality should be accessible to all, and that the inclusion and integration of arts education is essential to the cultivation of a thoughtful and productive citizenry. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Cole Thomason-Redus. Cole, welcome to the program. I'm so honored to have you today.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much, Audrey.
Of course, of course. I was so glad that this worked for this month, and I cannot wait to share this beautiful piece that I still can't believe you wrote it just for me. So when we get to that part of the program, that will be just such a special thing to share. And after just reading and sharing your biography with everyone, it's just so impressive, and I love especially how much you value your experience within the public school system and how that has continued to shape you not only as a performer, as a composer, but also as an advocate of public education. So I would love if you would not mind taking us on a little journey and delving a little deeper into your history there. Could you kind of talk to us a little bit about how you got your start and what your experience was with music as a youngster?
Yeah, my father was a very avid musician, and in my earlier life, he was just an amateur musician. It wasn't his profession. He did it just out of pure joy. He was a very talented choral singer. Earlier in his youth, he had played trombone. And so he really just believed that music is a part of everyone's education. Just as a child takes math or English or history, one takes music. My mom grew up sadly without much musical talent. We always joke that she plays the CD player, although she can't help with that. um, but she was always very good at sitting in the audience and applauding, and we always need those people as well. But she really felt that as a kid, she was never pushed to try out things in the arts and to stay with them. So for example, she took ballet and thought that she was actually really quite good at ballet. And she was taking ballet because her best friend was taking ballet. And so then when her best friend quit taking ballet, she quit taking ballet. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she said to me how she wishes her parents had been like, no, you've signed up for this, you're going to see this through. Mm-hmm. So kind of the other side of my dad, who thought that this is just what you do, she thought, I wish this had been something I had done. And so they just really felt it was so important that all three of us, my brother and my sister and myself, really had a very formal and complete music education. And all three of us are so grateful for that. So I grew up in a house where there was always music playing, whether it was classical music or blues or jazz or rock. My dad listened to everything. And at one point we had an entire wall of our house that was filled with records. And we still have a number of those, but not nearly as many as he had. So there was just always music playing. And then my brother, who was 5 years older than me, he probably in first or second grade started taking music at school. And so that was something I got to see him do and look up to, and couldn't wait until I was old enough to do the same thing. He also joined the San Francisco Boys Chorus, and I couldn't wait to be just like him and join the chorus. So when I was in first grade, I started having my first, I don't know if I should say formal education in music, because it was a group piano class at my school auditorium. So this was Jefferson Elementary School in the Sunset District of San Francisco. And on Fridays after school, the piano teacher would show up, and there was, probably 30 to 50 kids in this class. And we'd all be in the auditorium, and we would be handed that day's music sheet, which was normally a song. For example, Indian Boogie, which I can still play actually. Probably not the most sensitive name these days, but whatever. And so we'd be given the music, and it was our job to write in the notes. So that's really not music reading, but so we'd sit there writing in the notes. And once we had written in the notes, it was then our turn to go and sit at the piano and try our best to play through it. I was almost always one of the last kids to have written in the notes, because it was very difficult for me. I had a lot of trouble reading music as a kid. And so I would be one of the last kids at the piano trying to play through this. And as bad as I was writing down the letters, I was even worse at seeing them and being able to play them. So that first year of piano really didn't take me very far. And it was a year later in second grade that I joined the San Francisco Boys Chorus. And that's really when music began to consume my life in wonderful ways.
Wow. Oh, what wonderful opportunities. My goodness, I cannot imagine a group of first graders with that kind of involvement with piano and with reading music, with writing out the notes. That's a really impressive thing, Cole. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the way that your dad thought that this should just be a given, right? Just like you said, just like math, reading, writing, this is an integral component of a person's education. So thank you for sharing that. I think that is a lesson that I'm hoping with part of what this program can do is just make that normalcy, just something that we should all expect for the education of now for our young people. So wonderful. And so, of course, you started as a singer, as playing piano, learning to read music. Could you talk to us about the tipping point? Because you were at the San Francisco Conservatory eventually, later on in your life for composition. So I'm interested to know, at what point did you have that shift towards creating the music rather than just playing it?
Right. I can't remember a time where I wasn't in some way creating my own music and my own stories. As a kid, I loved puppets. I did puppet shows all the time. Once I was in the San Francisco Boys Chorus and started performing as a children's chorister with the San Francisco Opera. That was really life-changing, and all my puppet shows then became operas. So at one point I put on a production called Teddy Tosca. Tosca was my first opera in third grade. And so I put on a production called Teddy Tosca, starring all my, teddy bears and puppets. And at the end, spoiler alert, when she jumps off, I threw her across the room. That was the grand finale. And I would put on these shows for my parents' dinner parties. Besides believing heavily in a complete education, they also believed heavily in dinner parties and all things fun. Um, it was kind of like an anti-Maine situation where the guests would show up and I would be like, do you like your martini shaken or stirred? But so part of the evening's entertainment was always a puppet show. And so right away I started, just kind of making up my own songs that went in these puppet shows. And then in fourth grade is when I began studying at San Francisco Conservatory of Music in what was then called the prep or preparatory department. It's now called the pre-college division. And I started taking piano. And so right away that started kind of making the academic side of music a little more important. And it was also around that time that I actually started writing down compositions. I'd probably done a little bit of it before then, but I definitely became more serious about it around fourth grade. And then in sixth grade is when I started taking composition classes at the San Francisco Conservatory. And that's when I really started making composition one of the main things that I do, or at least at that time, that was the case. And that was an amazing experience. So every Saturday at 10:30, something like that, I would have my musicianship class. And then at 12:30, I had composition class, and it was an hour and a half. And so the first year that I was in that, and I did that class from sixth grade until my senior year in high school. The first year that I was in that class, I think there was maybe 5 of us in there, and everyone else in the class was like a junior or senior in high school. And here I was, this little sixth grader who had never heard of Bartok, and they all found that very funny. And we did so much listening to modern music and to contemporary music, to the point that in middle school, people like Schoenberg and Berg were my favorite composers, and I loved 12-tone, and everything I wrote was atonal and using 12-tone rows. I shouldn't say everything. No, I wrote tonal stuff too, but I really got into kind of the geeky, nerdy serial music system. So yeah, it was a wonderful way to be exposed to all the music that is out there, and to find my own ways to come up with my own music and make it be part of the music that is out there.
Sure, exactly. Well, and that makes total sense, especially when reading that wonderful review that you received for one of your compositions about the most beautiful dissonance they'd ever heard. And that there is something so powerful and integral musically to that, because that kind of a sound and that kind of tonal color with those, really those notes that crunch together and then resolve, really reflects so much of the human experience. And so I think that's wonderful that you went through that phase of your kind of compositional style. And certainly in the piece that we'll hear today, though I find it extremely tonal and accessible, you'll hear those lovely, deliciously, notes that come
Crunchy.
together. Yes. And then the resolution is so much more enjoyable
I
because of where we've come from. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that really defines my music these days. I would say perhaps all of what I write is tonal and is accessible, but is not watered down. It is always my goal to be as clever as possible and to really treat my audience as if they are intelligent, and hopefully they are. But yeah, there's dissonance throughout, and like you said, it's that human experience, and there is so much pain in this world. And you can't ignore that. There's always going to be pain, and it makes the other side, it makes the pleasurable moments so much better.
Exactly. And, to go through that together, right? To not brush that aside and, oh, let's just, sing things in major keys with nice, happy, triads and things, but to really go there, part of, I think, the beauty of having that pain in the first place is that we all can recognize that we've all been there. And then when you hear that reflected in a piece of music, it really has that deep connection that only humans can really know how to relate to and to express in those ways. So beautiful that you are making a contribution to music in a way that can connect and heal people in that way. That's lovely. And I
Yeah.
just have to say for your parents too, in terms of the way that they not only encouraged you with music, like you were saying, that there was always music in the house, that was just a given. It was just there for you and was always there for you. And the way that they also engaged you with those dinner parties, that they didn't relegate the children, children must be, seen and not heard, that you were a respected member of the family that was a part of those celebrations, not only in greeting the guests and things of that nature, but that you also were a featured performer, and I'm sure that legitimized your craft and your gifts that really gave you the confidence to go forward. I'm thinking that must have played a role in that. So what a wonderful example of your upbringing to share with us. That's a really
Absolutely. It certainly got me used to performing and to being in front of an audience and having that not be something that is worrisome. I feel so at home in front of an audience of any size, and the beginnings of that, it was definitely in those puppet shows and those dinner parties. Absolutely.
Definitely. Wow. Well, talk to us a little bit about the ways that you are utilizing your gifts now, particularly in your leadership role with the San Francisco Opera.
Yeah, one of the things I love so much about the career that I guess I'm now halfway through is just how diverse it's been and how I really have had the opportunity to make use of everything that I've always done leading up to whatever moment in time that may be. So like you said, I am now on staff at San Francisco Opera, where I am the educational content curator for the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Community. I always have to practice saying that because there's a lot of words in there. Yeah. Sometimes. And basically what that title means is that I get the honor and the pleasure of coming up with educational experiences for people, whether you were 5 years old or 95 years old, to make everyone realize that opera, music, art is something for everyone. These aren't things that are just for the most elite in our society. It is not for the people that only have the money. It really is for everyone. And art is storytelling. We all have a story to tell. We all have stories we love to hear. We also have stories we don't like to hear. And so I always remind people that, if you see an opera that you don't like, that doesn't mean you don't like opera. That means you didn't like that opera. You didn't like that story. No one would ever go to the movies and say, oh, I didn't like that movie. I'm never going to movies again. And yet, sadly, we see that happen a lot with opera. So a lot of what I'm trying to do at that company is to just help people make opera and art a part of their life. It's not about always finding the next opera singer. It's not always about finding the next huge donor. It's about making people realize that opera can be meaningful to them. It can have an impact on their life. It can be something that is important to them and something that they share with others. So one of those things is a series we have called Opera Aficionado, and that's a online interactive lecture that takes place every Sunday on Zoom. And we started doing that May a year ago. The world was in the middle of this COVID disaster. San Francisco Opera had just announced the cancellation of its summer season. And our department just was wondering, how can we still keep our patrons engaged? How can we make use of these pre-opera speakers and scholars that were all ready to give talks about these operas? And so we decided to just do this very informal online interaction, a conversation almost, that is now still going and is still going very strong. And so each month we have a different theme, and each Sunday is a topic within that theme. So currently for June, we are celebrating African American Appreciation Month and Juneteenth, which I'm so proud to say is now a national holiday. Yes. So just this last Sunday, we heard all about Marian Anderson. The week before that, we learned about opera in the Harlem Renaissance. So it's really been a great way to show the many diverse sides of opera. It's not just about La Traviata and La Boheme. And of course, those stories come up in our lectures as well, because who doesn't love La Boheme? Right. I certainly do. And so as you can imagine, there's a certain audience that comes to that show, and it's very similar to the audience that you would see at a pre-opera talk, at an opera performance. And as much as we love that audience, that's a part of the audience that we already have. And so a lot of what I do is also geared towards creating new audiences and creating new generations of audiences. When you look at our audience, you have to know that so many of the people we see there and we love to see there aren't going to be there in a decade and 2 decades, and who is. And so of course that means reaching out to young people. And just as opera and music and art was a part of my life, It's just such an honor and an exciting pleasure to figure out fun ways to make it a part of theirs.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Well, and to that point, I believe you might have a special companion with you today that might also like to be a guest this afternoon.
I do. So this really goes to show how I'm so lucky to be using all the things that I've been doing my whole life. So we talked earlier about puppet shows.
Mhm.
So before COVID hit us, I was actually planning the first ever puppet show at San Francisco Opera, designed to teach kids about characters in opera. It wasn't designed to teach them all about a specific opera or all about opera in general, but just to start planting seeds and have these characters and these stories be something that are part of their own stories. And so the star of this was my good friend here, Baritone the opera bear.
Hello, Bear.
And yes, he's so excited to be here. He gets shy sometimes, but hopefully he'll be good. Oh, there he goes. No, it's okay. It's okay. There you go. So we actually, I think we had scheduled 2 shows and immediately sold out. And so we just kept scheduling more and they kept all selling out. And then of course, the pandemic happened and we could not go forward with those performances. But I was just thinking like, this is such a great opportunity. Who doesn't love baritone? How can we still make him of use to the opera? How can we start introducing him to kids? And so I actually began writing children's books featuring baritone. They're called the Baritone Adventures. And they all take place between the San Francisco Opera House, the War Memorial Opera House, and Operaland. Operaland is a magical land where all the characters in opera sing happily ever after. So the very first one is called Opera Bear and the Three Divas. It's kind of like a Goldilocks story. And in it, he meets, who do you meet in that baritone? He meets Cinderella, he meets the Queen of the Night, he meets Carmen. Currently there are 5 books and I have plans for several more and I'll keep writing them as long as I'm able to. And so last fall, I believe it was November of 2020 is when we had our first online workshop with baritone. And what was that called? I don't even remember what it was called. It might have just been called Opera Bear and the Three Divas. But basically within a 45-minute hour workshop, kids would learn ta ta ti ti ta, so fun games with rhythm. I would teach them some solfege, including hand signals, do, re, mi, fa, so. I would teach them a song, and then I would read them one of the baritone tales. And so we've had a few of those workshops over the last year, and it's been so great to see the kids show up and be so excited to see baritone and to know who he is and to know the things he likes. For example, his favorite food is, don't listen, baritone, I'll get hungry. His favorite food is wedding cake. Yes, wedding cake. He loves wedding cake. And so, yes, so I'll be on the Zoom screen with these kids and I'll be like, what's baritone's favorite food? And they're like, wedding cake. And so just, seeing that relationship has been so cool. And at the end of each workshop, when the kids are like, I love baritone, I can't wait to meet baritone at the opera house. I mean, how many 5-year-olds do you know saying, I can't wait to go to the opera house?
Right.
That's just such a cool thing. And so that's exactly what we're aiming for. And it's my hope that these kids who are now meeting baritone are going to be coming back to the opera for the rest of their lives, and that they really will have found that opera can be a part of their life, music can be a part of their life, art can be a part of everyone's life.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So well said and so well thought out and presented. And I mean, who could not be enticed to go to the opera house if baritone were there? That's just what a wonderful concept. And I'm just so proud to know you and you baritone and for everything that you are doing to let young people know that opera is for everyone and that means them too. Well, so we're kind of batting things back and forth here. Bye, baritone. See you later. But one of the things that I was so touched by that we will share today was the piece that I will be presenting today, Quiet Spaces, which when you and I were, and so, speaking just really quickly about the Opera Aficionado program that you were describing. So I was so honored to be part of the March programming this year with the concert programming that I've curated on the women's suffrage movement. And so for Women's History Month, that was just a perfect fit. And it was just such a meaningful experience. And since that time, I've wanted to, to have Cole on this program. And so talking about, what kind of a piece and et cetera. And then to get in my inbox this beautiful song, and it says for Audrey, thinking, oh my goodness, you wrote this for me. And then to see that the poet shared the last name Reedus. And so I thought, well, this has to be a family member that wrote this text. So could you tell us the story of this text and of the wonderfully talented poet that you have in your family?
Yeah, so the poem Quiet Spaces was written by my great aunt on my father's side, and her name was Leona Reedus Sampson. And she was a incredibly regal and elegant Black woman who, at least from what I saw, never acted like a victim of society or of the time in which she was alive. She always presented herself so proudly. She always expected everyone in the family to do the same. And if you did anything less than, you would hear about it from Aunt Leona. And she was absolutely the matriarch of my dad's side of the family in San Francisco. He actually grew up in Texas. That's where she was from as well. So her sister, Aunt Dorothy, was the matriarch in the Texas side. And they were both just such strong women. They were both teachers and both authors. And so my Aunt Leona actually published 7 or 8 books of poetry in her lifetime. And so when I was at the conservatory in middle school, learning to write art songs, it was just so natural to me that I would find sources, textual sources in my own family. And so there were a number of her poems that I set to music. And actually Quiet Spaces was one of the poems that I set to music. I think I was a sophomore in high school when I first set Quiet Spaces to music. And it was so funny when you asked me to do this interview. I think I read your email late at night, and I have to admit, I just kind of scanned through it quickly, and I was like, oh, she wants to do an interview. Great. Yes, of course I will. And then you responded and you're like, oh, that's so great. Wonderful. Now we just have to figure out which of your art songs I'm going to sing. I was like, art song. I didn't read that part. I haven't written an art song since college, which is frighteningly now 20 years ago. And although they're great works, I still love them. I just felt like I needed to have something more representative. And I also wanted you to have something that really showed off your voice. And back when I was younger, a lot of the art songs I wrote were for very high sopranos. When I was in 8th grade, I had the honor of being in Britain's A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the soprano playing Titania was Sylvie McNair. And so from the age of 13, I had Sylvie McNair's voice in my head as the ultimate soprano. And everything I wrote for soprano was basically geared towards her voice. Sadly, there are very few voices like Sylvia's in the world ever. And so that was a good lesson for me as time went on to realize, oh, these pieces that I wrote aren't actually accessible to every performer. Not everyone wants to just float above the treble clef staff for pages, and not everybody should. So I'm sorry, I just went off on a tangent. I can't remember what I'm getting at.
It's great.
Yeah, so I all of a sudden realized that I needed to give you an art song. And I immediately thought about this poem. This poem came to mind, and I was trying to remember the words, and I kind of had it in my head, and I also couldn't find the score to the piece I'd written way back in 1994 or whenever that was. So I ended up driving over to my mom's house. She still lives in San Francisco. And I knew that all of my Aunt Leona's books were there. So I just spent a morning going through every single book until I finally came upon the poem. And it immediately turned into notes in my head. The opening notes of the song were just immediately what I heard when I saw the words, "Let me have some quiet spaces." And it's interesting because over these years, I've always had that original setting of this song stuck in my head. And so it was just really interesting that as soon as I looked at the poem again and remembered the words, how the melody just immediately changed in my mind. I don't know if that was just some random inspiration that the melody went into my mind, or if it speaks more to just the way that I have changed and matured over, the 30 years since I wrote that first one. But yeah, the piece just came so naturally to me, which is why I was able to write it for you in about 3 hours and text it to you that very next day.
Oh my God.
And yeah, in it, you hear all that dissonance that we talked about earlier. And in this context, I use that as a way to kind of paint this world where it's not quiet and there is dissonance and there is pain and there are things to distract us. And this woman, in this case, my Aunt Leona, or when you're singing it, you simply wants some quiet spaces and wants to drown out that dissonance and just have, you know, some open space where life calms down. So, you know, the perfect fifth shows up a lot in this piece, and that kind of represents that quiet open space in juxtaposition to these very crunchy chords. And I want to make one more comment about the dissonance that I do use so much. Part of that, I think, is because of my education in serial music and how comfortable that made me with dissonance. But also as a kid, I loved to hold down the pedal as I would improvise on the piano. And my mom would always walk by and say, too much pedal, let the pedal go. But I just loved this sound of these notes that never quite went away. To me, it's kind of like the oral version of stained glass. The way that you can have all these different shapes and different colors and even different textures of glass. And it's when the light shines through it that it becomes this thing of beauty. And sometimes not even looking at the stained glass, but looking at the pattern that is made on the wall. And so that's really what I try and create when I use these dissonances.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. That is so beautiful, so beautiful. And you'll hear in a moment the gorgeous accompaniment in the piano that reflects exactly what Cole just described. So Cole, before I sing this piece, I would be so honored if you would read this poem of your great aunt for us all.
I'd love to. So again, this is called Quiet Spaces, and it was written by my late great aunt, Leona Reedus Sampson, and she specifically wrote this on February 20th, 1992. Let me have some quiet spaces where life calms down and time is still. Uncluttered rooms with empty walls, open places that dreams can fill. Let me have some quiet spaces, limitless skies with breathing room and vistas wide, where silence grows, a heart can rest, and dreams can bloom.
Beautiful. And you read it so beautifully. Thank you so much. And now I'm honored to share this gorgeous song with all of you. Let me have some quiet spaces where life calms down and time is still. Uncluttered rooms with empty walls, open places that dreams can feel. Let me have some quiet spaces, limitless sky, with breathing room and vistas wide, where silence grows, a heart can rest, and dreams can bloom. Thank you once again so much, Cole, for the amazing gift of that song.
Thank you, Audrey. That was just so gorgeous, and it's a pleasure to hear it out loud. I heard you singing it as I wrote each note, but nothing compares to the real live performance. So thank you.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you to all of you for being here watching. Just like Cole was saying, about his mother being that integral component that is so crucial to composition and live performance, which is an audience. And so we really are so grateful to all of you for taking the time to watch. Thank you for being here. And so, Cole, now, as we look forward into the future, now that COVID is, hopefully subsiding, things are returning a little bit back to normal. I'd love to know, you do so much for young people, and you think so much about them and how you can reach them. What advice would you have for young scholars of music, young musicians and artists that are just getting their start and just starting to think about kind of their place within the musical world?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And without any hesitation, I would say be bold, be brave, don't be shy. I think so many artists, including myself, don't always realize their potential or don't get to where they might be able to be simply because they are afraid to be themselves and to express themselves. Especially as a kid growing up singing in operas, I had quite the target on me. And it was just such a instinct to hide in the corner and say, don't hurt me. And to any kid out there that has something special to say, please don't hide in that corner and say, don't hurt me. Instead, I'm going to refer to Baritone again. He teaches kids to say grr to their fears. And so please say grr to your fears. Say grr to those bullies who might make fun of you because you have something to say. And know that you are special because you have something to say. And do not for one moment stop saying it.
So true and so needed to be said. Thank you for taking the time to say that directly to that audience, Cole. I could not agree more. This has just been an absolute pleasure of an afternoon. I've been looking forward to this for such a long time, and I'm just thrilled to have spent this time with you and to have the gift of your company today. And I'm sure that everyone who has been watching you and learning from you today feels the same way. So, Cole, thank you again for your time today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Audrey. And my mother's come up a few times in this interview. So for one, I want to say hi, Mom. But I also, really want to point out that as a kid, not only did she make sure that art was a part of our lives with her support, but also with her work. When I was in first grade, my dad had a severe heart attack and had the first of many bypass surgeries. He actually ended up passing away 20 years ago after a heart transplant that didn't go as well as had hoped. And so after his surgery, my mom encouraged him to go back to school and get his teaching credential. And so he spent the rest of his life as a music teacher, which he absolutely loved. Mm-hmm. And my mom spent the rest of that time working 15 hours a day minimum, 5, 6, 7 days a week to ensure that myself, my older brother, and my younger sister could sing in the San Francisco Boys Chorus, in the San Francisco Girls Chorus, take our lessons at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And no parent should have to work that hard to make sure that their child gets a complete education. And so I know that a lot of you watching this are supporters of Audrey's organization. And so please support with all your heart, because it is really so important that every child out there has access to arts education and really knows that it is for them, and that no parent should have to bend over backwards the way that my mother did, and the years of her life that she gave up to make sure that the three of us are where we are today.
Wow. Again, so well said. And she, I'm sure, could not be more proud of you and your brother and your sister. And of course, I mean, what a labor of love and a sacrifice that she made. But my goodness, did you all not make the most of it? And she just must, I cannot imagine her not thinking that it had been worth it. But I agree that she definitely should not have had to do that. And thank you for those very, very true and profound words, Cole. We really appreciate hearing that. And we need to hear that. So thank you. Thank you so much. And for all of you watching today, this has been the Living Legacy series, and we sure hope you've enjoyed it.